Hello and welcome to a very special episode of Sum It Up. From our roots, we rise. Some conversations don't begin in the present. They began generations ago. Before any of us here today stepped into the roles we have, long before the formations of the LLIs, before any of us today had these leadership titles that we hold, there were ancestors, individuals who carved the path with their hands, with their hunger for justice, and for their refusal to stay silent when they needed their voices to be lifted. So today's show is about honoring that lineage, not as history, because it's not, but as a living force, still shaping who we are and what we fight for. I often think about this in this work, especially more recently than not. Our ancestors didn't pass the torch because the work was finished. They passed it because the work must continue. And they trusted that there would be someone, that there would be individuals ready to carry that work forward. And today, friends, that somebody, that someone, that's all of us. And we are joined by two extraordinary leaders who both carry the name, the weight of those names, the memories, the sacrifices, but also because of their own work and leadership, they carry the promise of what the future of our community is going to be. So it is such an honor to be able to welcome my friends, Julie Chavez Rodríguez, the granddaughter of César Chávez. Her legacy isn't just symbolic, it's active. From the White House to the front lines of civic engagement and community organizing, she has taken her grandfather's vision of a dignity for workers, for organizing power, and for community as strategy. And she's translated that into national leadership and public service at the highest levels of government. She is not only carrying his name, she's advancing his unfinished work. And I've seen that personally. And my dear friend Sergio, I don't even know where to begin, grandson of Rodolfo Corky Gonzales. And as many of us know, your grandfather was more than a poet. He was an activist. He led a movement, but he also put language to liberation for our community. He called it Chicano power. And that power, my friends, lives on through you and your work. And you have really honored his legacy by being an advocate, by making sure that justice was front and center. And you've always leveraged the power of public policy. So you two remind all of us that legacies are not meant to be admired. They're meant to be activated. So Julie and Sergio, you do not stand in your grandfather's shadows, not one bit. You actually stand in their light. And for me and for many others, you've helped extend that light forward. So welcome. I'm almost in disbelief that we were able to get us all together today to have a conversation about the past, the present, and the future. So thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much, Joelle. I'll just say, very happy to be here. Julie is a dear friend, and of course, you're a dear friend as well. I mean, you certainly yourself know about carrying on the legacy and the leadership of Familia. Your grandmother was a trailblazing leader, first Latina to lead Denver City Council. And so this is a very appropriate conversation for us all, you included, and very grateful for LLI. I know that you all have done really tremendous work at building community and also increasing connection and really important conversations like this one. So just want to commend you and the LLI for the work that you do.
Thank you, friend. I really appreciate our friendship over many, many decades, beginning with our grandparents. So I want to start there. And Julie, if you'll answer, and then Sergio, you can answer next. But you know, there's kind of this myth and legend of your grandfathers, you know, Cesar Chavez and Corky Gonzales. We're in the business of building up leaders and getting leaders prepared for the moment and to lead. I'm really curious about the individuals, the people behind the activism. From your perspective, what shaped them into the movement leaders that they became?
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Joelle. As Sergio mentioned, thank you for your ongoing leadership. I remember when we met in 2012, I think it was, out in Denver, Colorado. And so it's incredible to just see, your continued work and impact that you're having, with our community and well beyond. But, I think so often you're right. People don't necessarily see César and Corky, the human, the individual. They oftentimes, think about the impact and the significance of their work. But for my grandfather, there were a few kind of driving forces throughout his life. One was his deep-seated commitment to faith. He was, a devout Catholic, and for him, faith was about something. It was about action, right? It's like, how do you live your faith? How do you be in service to others? How do you use your life to bring about a better life for those that were less fortunate? And so his faith was a huge motivating factor, and just, wanting to, continue to, have an impact and be a part of something bigger than just himself. And then, growing up as a farm worker, that informed his sense of both, justice and injustice. He saw the injustices that, so many in his family and that he personally faced, but he also saw the power of organizing and of, even in the early days of workers banding together and demanding better working conditions or better living conditions. And so those were, some of the early experiences that he had that helped to inform the work that he later did. And the last one that I'll share is just his experience coming home from serving in the Navy. He served in the Western Pacific in the aftermath of World War II. And he, went off to join the military like, most, farm workers at the time. It was an opportunity to sort of, have a better life, to be able to, seek something, again, beyond the fields of California. And when he came back, he faced the same racism and discrimination and inopportunity that he had faced prior to joining the military. And that was, I think, his second experience with understanding injustice, and that he needed to do something about it. So his first act of kind of civil disobedience was actually well before starting the farm workers. He took my Nana Helen to the movies, and they told him he had to sit in the Mexican only section, and he refused to do so. And so they ended up arresting him in the theater because of it. But he said, I served my country. I believe that after serving my country, I deserve to sit anywhere in this theater, because I've given, I've sacrificed or chosen to sacrifice my life in that way. So those are some of the early experiences, I think, that helped inform who he was and why he, chose to eventually start the United Farm Workers.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Julie, for that. And I think faith and that military service and stuff, that's the common thread for many of our leaders over time. Sergio, how about you? Tell us about the myth and the man, Corky Gonzales, and what led him to kind of lead the Chicano movement the way he did.
Well, he was a child of the Depression, and he grew up in pretty extreme poverty. He used to joke, and he would say, we were so poor we didn't realize there was a depression. And I think that's because many people in the community, in our community, Latino community, Chicano community, right, like experiencing extreme issues like hunger or issues around cost of living. So this is the experience that he grew up with. He grew up in his mom had died when he was very young. So him and his brothers were raised primarily by his dad. And his dad was an immigrant from Mexico who was a very proud Mexican man. He had served in the Mexican Revolution. Mm-hmm. And so he really instilled in my grandfather early on, a sense of cultural pride. And I think, growing up in poverty, his dad worked many jobs. My grandfather worked many jobs too, to survive and to get by. And he had many professions. I mean, he's known for being a Chicano leader. He's known for, of course, I Am Joaquin and his poetry, but he's also, he was an entrepreneur. because he had to be resilient. And so, like, I think that's really indicative of the strong work ethic that we have across our community, where people are workers, and he did the same to support himself and his family. The other thing I think that shaped his upbringing and his value set is, what Julie mentioned, just encountering extreme discrimination when he was enrolled in school. There was no ESL program, so he was put into basically a class for people with mental disabilities, because they didn't have ESL and he spoke a different language. And so it was just like an example of, like, there was not an institution to support his education. And he also encountered just direct discrimination from teachers and others in the education system, as well as, interactions with government in general at the time. And then the third thing is he was a voracious reader. There were some really amazing influences across his life, especially in his early years. And one was this man he affectionately referred to as Uncle Bob, who was just a family friend, but who really instilled in him a sense of love for literature and learning. But the other was Father Moynihan, who was an Irish priest who was very, very, just like, Julie mentioned with César, who was a spiritual guide for him in a lot of ways. But Father Moynihan was also radical in the sense that he was an Irish American priest who strongly supported self-determination for working people and people of poverty. So he was a great influence in my grandfather's life as well. So I think those three things, and the last, which I mentioned in the beginning, but my grandfather family was really at the center of everything for him. Like, that was true when it was him and his dad and his brothers, when he was young. And certainly, like, when he married my grandmother, like, the family really was, if you had circles, the family was certainly the center of his entire life and his work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much for those such personal stories, because those, for us that know the legends you come from, we don't get to see that view and that side. But I have to ask you, coming from that, and it'll be a two-part question for both you, Julie and Sergio, is at what point did you kind of realize the significance of your grandfathers, not only to your family, but to history, would be my first part. And kind of the second part that comes from that is, how did that alter or change the way you understood kind of yourself and your place in the world? Like, when did you kind of realize, well, this is really big, and what did it mean to you individually?
Yeah, well, I can jump in. I think, there's maybe a couple of different points. The first, I was in third grade, and it's because we had moved to the East Coast. My dad was running an East Coast Great Boycott, and my grandfather was visiting us, and my teachers invited him to come into the classroom to speak to the students. And it was third grade, so he didn't talk about the Great Boycott or, the United Farm Workers. He talked about growing up in Arizona and the desert and Gila monsters. But I was like, why? Like, is everybody's grandpa coming to class? Like, it just didn't totally register. And then one of my classmates was like, wow, what's it like having a famous grandfather? And it just, again, couldn't really compute. But I remember that was the first time that maybe I started questioning, oh, maybe he's not just my grandfather. Maybe there's something more. And then I think when he passed away, I was about, I think I was 15 years old, and seeing the outpouring of support of, I don't know, just seeing the magnitude of impact that he had. I think I had kind of understood it, but it was just part of growing up. And so when he passed, to see again I don't know, just those that spoke of the impact that they had on him, both personally and globally, was when I began to sort of really understand the significance of his life, his work, and I think, at that time, I always assumed that that he would be my guide, right? That he would lead the way, and I would follow my grandfather kind of from now until the end. And so it was also at that moment that I was like, oh, wow. It kind of called into question, like you said, what was my future going to be? And who were the leaders that I was going to continue to follow?
It's amazing. Thank you for sharing that, Sergio. Would love to hear same from you. Like when did it hit you, the magnitude of the impact of your grandfather?
I think it was very young. He had nearly 30 grandkids. You know, at the time that he died, I think he had 24 grandkids. So he had a very big family. And but he was one of those family. He was like a grandpa who made you feel like you were the only grandkid somehow, with everything he had going. Like, you know, he had family, but then he still had his hand in a lot of different things related to the movement and other things that he was doing. So, but I remember when I was very young, you know, some of my earliest memories were he made it a point to take me regularly to go have Sunday brunch. And I would think I was like maybe 4 at the time. I was very, very young, but he would take me to brunch, and it was like a breakfast. It was like breakfast brunch, but like it was, you know, into a breakfast place in downtown Denver. And he just would have a conversation. Like I was a little adult. He would have a little conversation with me to talk with me about how I was doing, but he'd also talk about, you know, at the time, I think like fairly elevated subjects, but it really stuck with me. And the reason that impressed upon, but it was like when we would go out, everybody knew Corky. Everybody knew. Like the one thing is whenever people that remember him, like, and I remember walking around with him, it was like, hey, Corky, you know, he's constantly raising his hand and waving at people because he knew everyone. And I think that was really, for me, it was like, well, how does this person know so many people? Like, why does it seem he's so beloved by so many people? Like, I think I even asked my grandma, why does he have so many friends? You know, at the time when I was that age. And, but that was obviously rooted in his work on the Crusade was all about community connection, and it wasn't superficial. It was very deep. Mm-hmm. Like he would provide loans for families. Like you know, the Crusade also provided services to people. Like he would connect people with other people for help that they needed to do a small business. Like he was a connector, and he oftentimes did it very selflessly as well, and like giving his own wealth to that. And then he just built very authentic connections with people. So everyone knew him. And I think that was like those first moments of understanding that this was like a different kind of person, the leader that he was.
You too. I love hearing your stories because it validates so much of my own experience growing up. I often share that I thought everyone's family sat around the table during Sunday dinners talking about voter rights and social justice and economic empowerment. And, you know, it was crazy when I stepped out of my family, that normalcy that I grew up with, and would start to have these conversations that I thought everyone was having. And they'd look at me like I was from a different planet. Yeah. And, you know, I think because I want to get to your successes and your contributions as well, but before we transition, what do you think your grandfather's deepest hopes for our community truly were? Like if they had, you know, a vision into the future, what did they want all of us to be able to realize?
Sergio, do you want to jump in or you want me to go?
Okay, I'll take this one first. So I think that there were 2 big value sets or thoughts for my grandpa when it came to Chicanos. And it was rooted in his own experience and also his leadership, which is the 2 things largely. The vision is community control and self-determination. That's actually really reflected if you read I Am Joaquin. Yeah. It is really a declaration of like we are here. We have always been here. And a declaration of self and community, right? And so the Crusade for Justice really was built around a notion of we are not passive participants in what happens to us. we're not passive participants in policies that are shaped or in how the economy treats us. Like, we are active contributing participants in all of this who can control our own destiny. And so Servicios was all about a reclamation of culture and pride and heritage, but also around power, political power, economic power. And so, I think a hope that he has for our community, the hopes that he had for our community, that we would fully lean into our own identity and understand that we have a very proud legacy and heritage, that we should never be ashamed about who we are and where we come from. And he talks very much in I Am Joaquin about all of the challenges and the setbacks and the very difficult things that our ancestors have gone through for us to be here in this moment, right? He talks through the entire history of the challenges and of the pain as well, right? Mm-hmm. He says the end of it is like, I shall endure, I will endure. Like, those are the final lines. Mm-hmm. That is a very statement on that those challenges, they don't end, right? And today people are very afraid and we have a lot of anxiety over what we're seeing. But I go back to the poem because it was never easy. That's his point. What we can control is how we stand in the moment.
Well, and I mean, Sergio said it perfectly. I think it was really that sense of self-determination, and that sense of pride, and that, we should be in a position to determine our own fate and continue to create and build opportunity for ourselves, for our families, for our future. And I think that is really what they saw as true power of people having agency and being able to step into their lives and into this world with that agency fully.
Thank you. Love that. And part of that now is a good kind of transition into the work you both do. And I want to kind of transition in a interesting way to kind of, one, talk about the work you do, but also talk about, I've had kind of the honor to talk to folks that have come from deep legacies, whether it's civil, social, whether it's through sports. And coming from that legacy can have privilege and pressure, right? There's a little bit that comes with that. How did you embrace that, yet also blaze your own trail? And then from that, talk about your trail. How did you bring that all together?
Do you want to go, Julie?
Sure, I'll start. I mean, I think, how I've oftentimes kind of held, like, I guess the experience, right, of growing up, literally being raised by, your mentors and people that are, kind of heroes, but being able to kind of experience them in real life, was that was such a privilege. I had a very privileged upbringing, not from a material sense, but from an experiential sense. Mm-hmm. And knowing with privilege comes tremendous responsibility. And so always kind of, carrying the two as, important things that had to coexist. I couldn't, just live in the privilege and, have these incredible experiences and not do anything with that to kind of pay it forward. And at the same time, I couldn't take on a sense of martyrdom, because I think that there's a need for us generationally to continue to move beyond, like, how we choose to engage in the struggle. So that's kind of how I've chosen to try to navigate, my life and this work in so many ways. And, a big kind of shift in my trajectory or my pathway was when I decided to jump into politics. And it was really seeing a community organizer, someone from the same tradition that I was raised in and grew up in and saw tremendous power in, run for office. And so then I began to, I had always kind of worked on the margins of politics, mostly trying to influence the system from the outside, but to see someone like an organizer, run for the highest office, it forced me to imagine what it would look like actually organizing from within. So I chose to, go to Denver, Colorado. I didn't meet you guys in 2008, unfortunately, but I was dispatched to Denver, working with the UFW and supporting the Barack Obama campaign. And, from there just began to, see that there were, multiple pathways that could continue to achieve, real important impact for our community. And I think there's, we can talk more about what those experiences have been, but I think the two most tangible things for me that kept me, engaged in politics and keep me engaged in politics are seeing the impact of things like the Affordable Care Act and the millions of Americans and millions of Latinos that had access to quality, affordable care for the first time. And then DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and seeing literally 800,000 young people's lives transformed in real meaningful ways. So those are, I think, just some of the examples that I like to, often talk about when you think about the scale of impact that you can have in politics and working in government. That is really, for me, very life-changing.
Thank you for sharing. Such a beautiful way you said how you're taking from the past, but also have to kind of mold it for the future and the time that we're in as it changes. That really resonated, and thank you for sharing that. And I have the same question for you, Sergio, coming from such a great legacy. And you said a few words that struck me, and I have to kind of share this. Is my kids went to a school that started by someone within your family, and I was sitting there, and someone tapped me on the shoulder behind me and said, "Oh, welcome, you're great." Well, it was your grandfather. It was César Chávez. Just show how down to earth it was. And I'm sitting there going, I'm getting hugged by a giant here, and just regular down there person, but obviously massive legacy, massive impact. And how do you kind of handle that, all that comes with that? And then again, blaze your own trail and talk a little bit about what you do and how you got there.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think certainly growing up, knowing about him, his work, but not being disassociated from it, because that work continued as I was growing up, just like for Julie. I mean, Julie was very much part of that movement as she was growing up, and I was very much a part of my grandfather's movement still, right? I mean, we think about it as being civil rights, and you think of a particular era, sometimes of like 60s, 70s, that work continued through various strains through the 80s and the 90s. And so, I do remember being young and going to marches and going to protests, and the values my grandfather instilled in me very directly as in my upbringing. And so, you grow up with a set of values, and you grow up with a perspective around community change and justice and equality and opportunity. And then as you're growing up, you're figuring out, well, how do I carry this forward? Knowing that I will not be Corky Gonzales. There will never be another Corky. He's his own leader, and he has that moment, but it's like, how do you continue that work most effectively? And what skills do you have, right? Or do I have to do that best? And I think social political activation really happened in college, and people in Colorado appreciate this. It was at the University of Colorado at Boulder, and got very involved in coalition work with other student groups who were there in fighting for issues around justice and equality and opportunity. And then we decided to run a slate of people for student government, and we won narrowly, but people in that slate included, but it was also a lesson for my grandpa in coalition building. He was all about coalitions, and he participated in the Poor People's March. He was a strong supporter of César and the boycotts. My dad told me that, my grandpa used to get these vans, and they would drive around, and they'd go to talk to people about the boycotts and not getting the grapes at the stores. And so, but my grandfather believed in coalition. And I think to that point, I have always been like this strong believer in in coalition work, because that is really how we all lift up the boats and we all support each other effectively to create policy change. And so when I ran for student government, it was in a coalition. You know, it wasn't Latino or Chicano specific, although we definitely had Chicanos who were part of that. But it was like Joe Neguse, who is part of our slate, right? Who's a congressperson now in Congress. It was Jesse Ulubari, who was a state senator. It was Leslie Herod, who went on to go be state representative and lead committees in the state house. So I just say those names because like we were all very different, but we supported each other's work in a coalition fashion. So that was the coalition work. And then just, like Julie, I then went off into politics and I started working in the Senate for Senator Bennett, worked with Julie on the 2013 immigration bill that passed out of the Senate in 2013 with bipartisan support, and unfortunately was never enacted because the House wouldn't bring it for a vote. But then I transitioned into the political work to make change possible.
And I'll just, if I can interject and also mention just like Sergio's work in particular on the Senate bill was so profound because he, literally authored the farm worker provisions and was able to put forward policy and just an approach that had, never been done before, was extremely innovative. He was able to bring in, talk about a coalition of folks from, ag business and, this multi-billion-dollar industry to the farm workers, and ensuring that everyone had a seat at the table and a voice in determining what the path forward was. So it is, in my, humble opinion, one of the strongest pieces of immigration legislation for farm workers. And then, obviously the bipartisan bill in general was phenomenal, but just getting a chance to see Sergio's steady hand in that process was, I was absolutely blown away. I had seen him on the campaign in Obama's reelect in 2012, and obviously was blown away then, but just to see that, translated into kind of the halls of the Senate on such a critical piece of legislation was just, I don't know, a point of personal pride. So I had to.
I appreciate it, Julie. And look, I'm gonna take personal privilege too, because we're gonna talk. Julie and I have worked together now in many different areas, and actually, on that bill, I worked with Julie, who at that point was in the Obama White House. So this is just like how everything is full circle with these things.
Yeah.
Julie and I worked together. We met each other really in earnest in Colorado during the Obama re-election campaign, and we shared a very small office together. But we were very scrappy, and we got the job done, obviously, in that election. And then we worked together on this immigration bill, and Julie was one of the leaders from the White House in making this bill happen. And obviously at the time, this was one of President Obama's, it was his top priority of getting it done. And so she was like the general who has helped marshaling all these pieces and the full weight of the White House and the coalition work to move this through. But then, even to add another layer on it, Julie's dad, Arturo, who at the time was president of the United Farm Workers, he was the person in the negotiations with me. And it was Arturo, and it was him representing and a staffer. And so there was a room, there was a negotiation room when we were writing that bill, and we would be there all hours of the day and the night. Literally, there were some days we were in there for a full day and a night. And it was Arturo, and it was Senator Feinstein at the time, who was one of the leaders on the Judiciary Committee, Senator Bennett from Colorado, Marco Rubio was in that as well. And we were negotiating these farm worker provisions. And then Arturo was in that too. And Julie was then basically leading on the outside and pulling the political pieces to get it done. And so, look, and I also say this about Arturo, and not only was Julie masterful, and at that point I saw her, and she would never say this, but I will say it, one of the most powerful people in Washington, seriously, just not even talking about any particular community, just most powerful people in Washington. And to see her move a coalition, and to also, she's an organizer, so she understands organizing strategy. She understands how to leverage people in coalition into actual power. And so that was something I saw up close and personal. And then Arturo, man, I mean, he taught me a lot about negotiations. I mean, he's sitting there in his own power, but like Julie said, there's like 6 different agribusiness leaders representing billions of dollars in industry. And then there's Arturo on the other side of the table representing the workers. And, you know, a lot of people just wouldn't be able to hang with that, but he really did. And he was masterful in terms of this strategic approach on that. And he was also masterful in that, in terms of how he knew how to work and leverage his own power with members to make the policies that he wanted to have happen actually happen.
And I haven't missed Washington, D.C. since I left it in 2012. So thank you both. And I just have to amplify this for folks who maybe haven't spent time in Washington, D.C. and understand the power dynamics and just how important it is to have these two extraordinary leaders and humans in the room where things happen. I have watched Julie and Sergio work, been up close and personal to their influence, their power, and ultimately how it begins to have a ripple effect in communities. And I just have to amplify that now more than ever, it's not the time to back down or shy away from the hard work. We need more Julies and Sergios in those spaces and places because it matters in such a way. And I talk about leadership and these legacies that we're continuing to leave behind as both a blessing and a curse sometimes. Mm-hmm. But we are all blessed because you have been in those spaces and places on our behalf. And I want to, kind of end in this last segment of conversation because we are in a season, we are in a moment of our own. And it is not up to the ancestors anymore. We can take all the lessons and the teachings and the motivation, but we are tomorrow's ancestors. It is upon us now to decide how we live, how we lead, and what legacies we're going to leave behind. So in closing in this last segment, what do you see, given your vast experience and perspectives, what do you see this moment being? What is this new moment that we need to leave? What's going to be required of each of us to make sure that not only do we fight the resistance, but that we're actually charging forward to the things that your grandfathers hoped for all of us, which is self-determination, agency, wealth, power, influence, leadership, all the things that the LLI fights for. Help me understand what this moment is really all about. And I'll start with Sergio and then we'll close with Julie on this one.
I just, in preparing for this conversation, I was reflecting on my grandfather's work and reflecting on the moments that he lived through to do his work. And it was not easy. I mean, there was outright discrimination. There was the outright weaponization of government against him in the Crusade, like just objectively so. But that was also the society that he was born into, right? That was the society that he was trying to change. And so it's a reminder that like things have been very hard in the past, very, very hard in ways that I personally have not experienced. And so a reminder that even in a moment when things are really daunting and things can be really scary and things can be really challenging, there were people like my grandfather and Julie's grandfather who decided that they were not going to accept the status quo and that they were going to use the power of the people to change it. That's what they did at the end of the day. And so I really would encourage people to remember that we do have agency and we do have power. We're not at the mercy of others and that we should stand in that very power.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think, being able to stand in our power right now is more important now than ever. And I think about, oftentimes there's, certain quotes of my grandfather's that come to mind. One, when he talked about power, he said that, the growers didn't have a lot of power. It's just that the farm workers were choosing not to exercise theirs. And that was, what the movement was all about, was showing them that they had power. And again, that they had agency. And I think now is that, same moment in time. We've heard from other leaders like Coretta Scott King, who often says that, civil rights has to be, sort of fought and won with every generation. And this is our moment. This is sort of this next significant kind of, effort. And but as Sergio said, we have seen very dark times in our country. I didn't think that I would be living through this moment right now, but we have also seen triumph, and we have seen our communities overcome and continue to strengthen, just the sense of work and power and connection that they have. And so I think that that's the moment that we're called to. And I think it's a moment too where we have to also, step into our power. We need to find our people. We need to, be in community and stand in solidarity with one another. And, we've done it before. And, as they say, when we fight, we win.
I know, Joelle, I know you're going to close it out. I do want to thank you both for that. And also makes me think of last week, and both of you probably know Juana Bordas. And one thing, that commonality that ties us all together, she reminded us of perspective, and perspective can be a bridge to hope. Like, she reminded us of where we came from, how hard we had to fight. And yes, we got to put the armor back on and fight again, but it's not new. It may look a little different. The world may be a little different, but what we're dealing with isn't new. And I just want to amplify what you said around perspective, because I think that gives us and our community hope as we move forward, that what we can take from the past can lead us forward. And I know, Joe, you'll close us out, but that was very powerful.
I honestly am almost at a loss for words, and all of you know me well enough to know that is not often the case. And it's because I feel so empowered, but I really feel validated and seen in a way. And I think so many of the messages that you shared today are exactly why we started the LLI 11 years ago. And that is, we are a collectivist leadership society, and that we really rise when we work together. We do this work on behalf of community. We believe and have a vision for the future where we do have that agency, that self-determination and declaration for standing in that power. And now more than ever, I do believe that we have what is necessary to change outcomes, not only for ourselves, but for the generations to follow, because we have leaders like Julie and Sergio doing the important work. LLI 11 years ago started in Colorado. Today, we are in over 35 states and 7 countries from coast to coast, 100,000 strong of Latino leaders in every sector and industry. We have allies and partners who have our back. If ever there was a time for us to leverage that type of collective network with a shared vision of our full potential, it is now. And I just feel so lucky to be in this position with all of you, and to be able to leverage friendships like Sergio and Julie, so that we could tap into the wisdom of our ancestors, but take the reins for the work that we are now all responsible to do. And I think that not only will we come out okay, we're going to come out stronger than ever. And I believe that more than I did yesterday, because of the two of you, because you've reminded me so much about our past, our present, and the potential of our future. So thank you so much for being here. And thanks to everyone for joining us today. Please share this message with your networks, because I think it's one that I hope will have a ripple effect for people to know that you have power, you have agency, and now is the time where we can come together as a community and create the future we all want for ourselves and for future generations. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Thanks, friends.